this talk is about testing in production. I test in production, so do you. Everyone does it. Everyone does it, whether they admit it or not. And I actually feel like the problem is not that we do it. It's not that we test in production that's a problem. It's the fact that we're too ashamed to admit it, which prevents us from naming what we're doing, identifying it, and improving upon it. Things that happen in the dark don't tend to improve. My name is Charity Majors. I am an operations engineer by trade. I am the co-founder of honeycomb.io, the world's first observability tool. I have spent a career being the first infrastructure engineer who comes into a small team of software engineers and helps them grow up. I really enjoy doing that. I also do a lot of database stuff. I wrote the database reliability engineering book with Lane and Liz Functions, and I have the observability book coming out for O'Reilly in the next few months. Pre-release copies are available now. And you can tell that I'm from ops because this is how I feel about software. The only good diff is a red diff. Testing in production has really gotten a bad rap. I mostly blame this dude. I feel like it's a funny meme. Of course it is. I used to have this poster on my wall. It's hilarious. I don't always test my code, but when I do, I test in production. That's fantastic. But there's this implicit dichotomy there where it's like this false implication that testing in production somehow implies that you don't test in any other ways. In fact, you can do both, and you must do both. And I would argue that testing in production is no less important than unit tests, integration tests, all that jazz. In fact, if I had to choose only one, and I do not, let's make that perfectly clear, I do live in a world where I can have both. If I had to choose only one, I would go with the ability to test in production because it is the one that is most embedded and grounded in reality. If I could only have unit tests and integration tests and had no ability to look at my software while it was running, I would be worse off than if I could not do unit and integration tests, but I had full access to a range of rich production testing stuff. But like the idea that you can only have one or the other, or that good engineers do one and not the other, is wrong. It's misleading, and it makes people waste energy in the wrong places. But like, given that we all do it, and given that like officially, like anytime that anyone ships any change, that change is a test, right? There's a unit there of irreducible complexity made up of that unique and non-repeatable intersection of artifact, deploy process, environment, and system state. Everyone does. If you have production, you test in production. So what's the big deal, right? What's all the fear and fuss about? Well, when you say test in production, they tend to hear this. They hear cowboy coding. They hear people logging in, just getting a root shell in the database and like hand editing the table schema, right? They hear you not giving a shit about your users. And to be clear, those things are really bad. It's fine for knees to jerk a little bit over that. Testing in production, like any powerful thing, like can be done really badly, really easily. Pretty much anything you do in production can fall under this category. I would actually argue that the ability to successfully and safely test in production requires a significant amount of architectural and automation and sophistication, from understanding of the best practices, the ability to design systems and tweak them from the ground up to lend themselves well to this form of testing. It's not like you just flip a switch one day or you just buy a tool and suddenly you're testing in production well. No, that sounds really scary, and that is not possible. Some caution is wise. And it's also true that in some ways you must be this high to ride this ride. Like Sam Newman, who famously, or Martin Fowler, who said that about microservices. You must have mastered the fundamentals in order to move on to the advanced concepts. You must have mastered unit tests and integration tests to be able to move on to actually running, you know, continuous 20% load tests in production on the same hardware as your production services. You need to have a really strong background in operations, I think, in order to both build the systems that can do this, to do it successfully, to know how to use them, and then to pass on that knowledge throughout your internal tribe. You know, like each one of our systems is this really complex, wonderful, beautiful little snowflake, right? It is an intrinsically unique, complex socio-technical system. And what that means is you and I can learn broad principles from each other. We can tell specific stories, but the interpretation of those stories and the application of those techniques is to be left up to, you know, the hearer, the recipient, because your system is not my system. I don't know what's best for your system. You don't know what's best for my system. So a fair dash of humility is often required too, because, you know, we can tell you what the rules are all day long, but rules are made to be broken. So, and again, it is never a substitute for pre-production testing. You can have both. I always test my code, and then I test it again in production. This is the man we need in our life. I started giving talks about, you know, testing in production 3 or 4 years ago. Mostly, I'll be perfectly honest, because it made people lose their shit, and I found that hilarious. It seems to push people's buttons a little bit less these days, which is probably good, but it also makes it less fun. Anyway, I don't think that this is just a fun argument over a provocative phrase, though. I think that it is really kind of a struggle for the soul of our industry. And while there is no question in my mind that my side will win, there's quite a long variance in like how quickly we can win, how decisively, how many engineers, you know, out there today, like so many engineers are burning themselves out. They're giving their all. They're, you know, they're going through the fire. They're going through hell. And it's not necessary. A lot of it is not necessary. And that's what wakes me up every day is just this burning anger at how much of our lives, how much of my life was wasted on bullshit that I didn't need to do, that a computer should have been doing, or that, you know, this profession can be very inhumane at times. I love it. People always ask, what would you be doing in tech if you weren't in tech? I'm like, I don't fucking know. Like, obviously I'd be in tech. I was born to be in tech. But we need to make it more humane. We need better tools. And production itself, in general, I think needs a bit of a rebrand. You know, we in ops, we were so terrified, you know, of our monoliths going down anytime a bad actor showed up that we became very non-welcoming, shall we say. Very like, stand back. This is my turf. I'll cut you if you dare to step on it. So we've got some ground to make up there as well. I really feel like we should try to make production less of a glass castle, right? And make it a little bit more of an adult playground, something like that. Software has some pretty big problems. I assume you all are familiar with the DORA reports and with Accelerate. We get the canonical 4 questions. How often do you deploy? How long does it take your code to go live? How many of your deploys fail? How long does it take to recover? I would add a 5th. I think every team should be tracking these 5. The 5th being, how often are you paged outside of work hours? I think every manager should be graphing these. You should be looking at these at least weekly to see if you're headed in the right direction or the wrong direction. And if you haven't read Accelerate, I assume all of you have. You seem like smart people. I can't see you, but you seem like smart people. But like the key finding from Accelerate was just that, you know, these first 4 metrics can tell you how high performing a team you are or aren't, roughly, for most people. And furthermore, you can become a more high performing team by choosing those metrics, by teaching to the test, right? By making it so that, you know, your deploys go out much more quickly after your code was written, making it so that they, you know, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to skip past the rest of that in order to just show you the main things I want to focus on, which is just that there's a big gap between like the quote unquote elite teams and the rest of us. And it's getting bigger. And if you look at those numbers, like deployment time, on demand, multiple deploys per day for elite, once per week to once per month for low to medium, that's a lot of wasted hours. That's a lot of time some engineers are spending not doing anything interesting or new, not focusing on learning new skills, not doing anything to move the business forward. They're just fighting against the tyranny of their own internal systems. Almost all of it is pre-production. Spoiler alert. It's big and it's getting bigger. And we waste a lot of time. This is the Stripe developer report. I recommend spending a few minutes of this if you really want to be shocked sober, or whatever the equivalent is for you. We waste so much time on stuff that doesn't move the business forward, that doesn't make you learn anything new, doesn't make you create anything interesting. It's just simply doing the work that you have to do in order to get to the work that you want to do. It's reproducing bugs, errors, figuring out what to do, doing the wrong thing because you couldn't see what you were doing, having to redo it all, dealing with technical debt, orienting yourself in time and space, figuring out what the last people to work on this code base were doing. You know, the glasses metaphor comes into play big time here. Like, if you can't see where you're going when you drive down the road, you don't drive very fast, right? When you've got full visibility, yeah, you can sit back and cruise. Your feedback loop is going to be long and lossy, and you're going to spend more time just studying yourself and looking for, you know, evidence that you're still on the right path than actually doing the work. What's messed up is that we think this is normal, that we think that this is just the way it is. If you've got a job doing software, it's not normal, and it's not inevitable. And basically the whole theme of this talk, that what I want to talk about, is just how do we get there? Because, you know, there's this enormous shift underway. Testing and production is part of it, and we're going to talk about that a bit, but it's not all of it by any means. And, you know, the delta that you see in the elite teams that are just ballooning and reaching escape velocity, these are the teams that are leaning in and adopting all of these new best practices and tools around production. These are the teams that are abandoning all the wasteland of crap that, you know, we'll get to that. Final takeaway from the Stripe report: 42% of the average engineer's time. The average engineer, not even like that. There are people who are way worse than that. Half your day, half your week, half your life goes to bullshit. I think we can do better. And for individuals, like, it really pays off to be in a high-performing team. This is not a question of how good are you as an engineer. That's not the difference between high-performing teams and like elite. 1,000% guarantee you it's not, because I've been on both sides of that. It's about the team. It's about the context of the team. It's about, you know, the hoops that you have to jump through in order to get a pull request accepted. It's about the strength of your CI/CD pipeline, how automated it is, how good you have automated error checking, like all the stuff that enables you to move quickly with confidence. That's what makes you a good engineer, right? It's not that you get to become an elite team by being the best engineer. You get to become an elite engineer by finding one of the best teams and joining it. And what are those elite teams doing? They're investing in production. Observability, instrumentation, picking up the pace, shrinking the time to deploy, you know, educating themselves, making sure that every person on the team is production literate, is production capable, can sit here, you know, writing code, knowing what they're building. They've got, you know, that original intent up in their head. It's beautiful. and then they save their code, right? They merge it to main, they stand up and stretch. A couple of minutes later, it's in production, and they go look at it using the same eyes that they just used to write the code. They go and they look at it through the lens of the instrumentation that they just wrote, asking themselves, how am I going to know if this is working when it's in production in a few minutes? And then they go and they look and they ask themselves, how can I know if it's doing what I wanted it to do or not? And you know what? Does anything else look weird while I'm here? If you can get a team full of people who can do that, who are trained to do that, who learn to associate dopamine hits with doing that, you're going to be doing well. By the way, the Honeycomb team, our DORA metrics are about an order of magnitude better than that of the elite performers in this bubble. And we did not go out and hire all of the best engineers. We hired good engineers who are good at communication, who like learning new things, who were collaborative, and who wanted to pick up this crazy shit we were trying to sell people on, observability. And now they're some of the best engineers in the world. They didn't start out that way. That's because that's not the direction that causal loop goes. If you're on a shitty team, never mind. This is not my excuse to tell everyone to quit their jobs. That's a different talk. Anyway, there are a few different ways, though, to talk and think about running in production. There's more than one way. When I say, get your shit into production, I don't mean make sure everybody sees it immediately after you write it, because you're right. That would be stupid. There are 3 ways, and I grabbed this from one of Cindy's great articles on testing in production because I really liked it. It really maps to the way I've always thought about it, which is, and she grabbed, of course, from this some great articles on the dearly departed Turbine Labs. They had some great writing about releases. So for deploys, here's how they defined it. It is the process for installing the new version of your services code and production infrastructure. Note that's not like for re-imaging all of your everything from scratch. It's your business logic, right? Your code that you're actively developing. Deployment doesn't have to expose customers to a new version of your service, right? And it probably shouldn't. Nevertheless, you're getting that code into production, right? That counts. It totally counts. One thing this does very nicely is it minimizes and possibly even entirely eliminates the need to maintain separate dev, test, and staging environments, which then invariably become dependencies that need to be kept in sync with production, which takes up half your engineering time and is impossible. It also applies a certain design pressure on engineers to decouple their services in a manner so that the failure of a test run in production on a given instance of a service does not lead to cascading failures or user impacting failures of other services, right? Designing data models and database schemas to be non-idempotent requests, right? Especially writes. Baking all this stuff into your tooling and the way you write code is life-changing. And then there's what they had to say about releases. And often people say deploys when they mean releases, and they say releases when they mean deploys less often. But if you've been around the block a few times and seen some software get just deployed a few times, you probably have some scars from it, which are legitimate. I would never take that wisdom away from you. The ability to safely release code is one thing, but then the ability to, in a controlled manner, expose increasing waves of people to it is a different issue. And things that come into play here would be feature flags, would be canary groups, rolling groups of users, and you need to worry about this both for the front end sake, the UI UX. Maybe you want to start with a canary group that you've selected because they're friends and family, or they're internal users or something. You want to deploy to them first, see if anybody notices anything, then you want to roll it out to other users. There's also a version of the story though that you need for the back end, because, you know, say you're deploying a change that you know is going to be hitting the caching layer a little bit harder. It's not enough to just do a canary of, you know, 10% of your hosts and then like deploy the rest. It's not even enough to like deploy slowly up to 50 and then turn on the rest, right? No, it's actually that last 10, 20, 30% where you're most likely to encounter any, shall we say, edge cases, right? So we're just getting a lot of different kinds of controls here. This has been being referred to by Monk Chips and others as progressive deployment. And it was really itching for a name. So I'm delighted to see that it has acquired one. And then there's post-release. These are often called experiments. And I will not lie, I have done a string substitute from tests in production to run some experiments more than once to get buy-in from other teams or higher ups. And the thing to remember, like after you've shipped your code, is that it's broken. It's already broken. It's broken whether you know it is or not, right? Like your distributed system exists in a continuous state of partial degradation, and that's the best case scenario. So this is where we get into stuff like, you know, chaos engineering, fault injection, A/B tests, you know, all these different kinds of experiments. And Cindy had this really great little list that I have kind of copied some stuff from here about just like what we're talking about. So there's a wide range of risk profiles here, right? A wide range of types of tests. And you can see, right, how by confining yourself to, you know, everything that happens before you hit merge, look at this incredibly rich world of powerful tools that you are starving yourself of for. You know, there are so many things you are never going to encounter in staging. You just won't. Like even the gold standard, what we all, you know, and I will point out that the closer you get to laying bits down in disk, the more paranoid you should be, and the more pre-production testing you should do. So for example, anytime you've got a database major version upgrade, you bet your ass I'm going to do some offline testing. In fact, I have written this particular piece of software, not once, not twice, but 3 times for 3 different databases for accomplishing major version upgrades safely, where all it does is just sniff 24 hours worth of traffic to the database, and then, you know, they've captured it, and then it replays it against a snapshot of the database that was taken at the time that you began sniffing the queries. And we then just run it all and adjust certain knobs like concurrency and, you know, transactions and number of, like, you know, whatever, just to see, like, is it faster or slower than my old version was for this workload? Nothing else matters. For me, for my workload, which means that no like standard off-the-shelf benchmark testing tool is ever going to work. You know, gold standard. Even if you had that for your entire distributed system, it would still not solve the Michael Jackson problem, where one day Michael Jackson is alive and the next day he's not, and you couldn't have predicted it. I assume you did not kill Michael Jackson. You couldn't have predicted it. You probably shouldn't try. Like, this is where you start to just see like the wisdom in just giving up control, right? It's very Zen, it's very Buddhist. It's also just what you do when you're exhausted from trying. Just like, I give up. I can't predict what's going to happen. I officially quit trying, that is. And I will just learn to get better at handling whatever the hell does happen, right? And therefore, you know, from all that, we got microservices. So you could say it's a blessing or a curse. I don't know. When you don't know the answer, you should experiment and learn what you can under controlled conditions. This was Cindy's super cute graphic. And I found like the Twitter thread, and I was referring to this as like the 4th trimester, which is this term from, you know, evolutionary biology about how human babies are born so weak and helpless and dumb, and they just stand there squalling all the time and breaking constantly, and they've got all these terrible failure conditions, and somebody's got to run around like picking up after them all the time. They slowly like stand on their own 2 feet, and that's your code, is what I'm saying. Your code is like a newborn baby that's shitting itself all the time and needs you to run around after it, cleaning it up. It would be incredibly rude for you as a new code parent to just go, okay, ops, have fun. I'll be back with another code baby in, you know, a week. Like, that's not cool. They didn't consent to that. You take care of your own code baby until your code baby can sleep through the night and wipe its own ass. That should have just been the talk right there. That's enough. Nevertheless, still got time. So let's talk about some things that people say about staging that drive me batshit. Naive staging questions. Why test in production when you could just be testing and staging? Shouldn't you always like default on the side of adding more confidence by testing and staging though? Isn't that just the mature, responsible, sane thing to do? Or my favorite, we prefer to find our bugs in staging, not production. Oh, grasshoppers. This is like I call it the more staging is always better / safer bias. And it seems to reign unquestioned, but very stupid. Sorry, that's not very nice. Unexamined. People live in the unexamined life over there. In fact, anyone who's spent any time at all with staging environments knows that you can decrease confidence by running it in more staging environments just as well as you can add confidence, because very often, let me emphasize, very often, something will break in production and will not break in staging. And just as equally likely, things will not break in production and will break in staging. And you can choose to spend the rest of your life chasing down differences between the two environments and realizing every time that it was, oh, the instance type, oh, it's the network, oh, it's the fact that my config file is different, oh, it's the environment, oh, it's I ask you to ask yourself, was any of that moving the business forward? No, it was not. Another claim that I find naive and laughable is, we keep staging in sync with production. It is a representative environment. That's why we test and staging, so that we can be sure. To which I would say, no. Staging has far more in common with your laptop than it does with production. And if you're a fan of mythical creatures, maybe that explains your devotion to staging environments. Staging facts of life. Non-prod environments will never look, fail, or behave just like prod. Each additional environment will surface as many novel bugs as production does, and you will have to repro on all of them. The best way to find, assuming what you care about is bugs in production, the best way to find those bugs, the only way to find most of those bugs, is to consistently practice observability-driven development. And let / allow / force / you know, two sides of the same coin, allow developers to own their software all the way out to watching users run it in production. It's nothing to do with staging environments. But ultimately, you're gonna find most production bugs in production. And here's the thing, I'm not saying staging is worthless. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not trying to get you to stop using staging. I'm not. I think it has some really valid use cases. What burns me is when I see production get the leftovers. When I see engineers slogging away for days and weeks trying to get these environments to match up, trying to figure out the differences in the environments, trying to bring up another staging environment, trying to bring up, I shit you not, a staging cluster for each developer. The quantity, the hundreds of years of developer energy that have gone into these stupid things over my life boggles the environment, the imagination. But then like we come down to like building some guardrails into production, building some better tools for production, getting some sweet software engineering energy to like really tend to production, to shrink that seat, to fulfill the promise of continuous delivery. And it's like, oh no, we don't have the time. Oops, that's not going to fit into our sprints. That's not one of our goals. That we've spent all this time. We have lost at gambling the dice on staging, so we've got nothing left to put in our savings account in production. All I'm asking is that you reverse the order of importance. All I'm asking is that you start taking production seriously, that you start putting it first, that you ask yourself, how can we give our engineers what they need to really understand what their code is doing while users are interacting with it in production? What do you need? What kind of visibility do you need? What kind of observability do you need? What kind of instrumentation must you do? What kind of tooling must you adopt? What kind of shiny, young, upstart startup named after, sorry, I'm doing that really badly, whatever, just like, know what you want, have ideas, try them, be unafraid to fail, be unafraid to sink that kind of devotion into production, and feel that it is yours. I feel like sometimes software engineers haven't really yet made the leap to like embodying that personal identification with it being done well, right? Because it's Ops's job, and I actually care less about you actually getting paged and woken up, dear software engineers, and I care more about you feeling that ownership and that concern in your gut. It needs to be your baby, your squalling naked baby on the floor, because it is. It's your baby. Where was I? Right, production. All I'm asking is that you give the crumbs to staging, because if confidence is what you're looking for, production is how you get it. And I just ranted through the entire second half of that. Okay, you are constrained. The engineering cycles is the scarcest resource in your firmament. I know it's my scarcest resource too. And it can feel galling to spend lots of developer cycles on what feels a little like navel gazing, but it's not. It is an investment account in the glorious First National Bank of technical debt. Going faster is safer, right? That's what we learned. So also, Katie McCaffrey gave this great talk at Papers We Love. There's a link there, where she showed that you can catch 80% of the bugs with 20% of the effort, and you should. Where are you going to catch them? So you can use your energy in staging. I started writing something here, and I realized it was almost a haiku, so then I made it into a haiku. Staging, it is awful. A brief note on observability, because the shift from these tightly controlled staging environments to the more loosey-goosey production, also it tracks our industry's shift from monitoring to observability, which is the direct consequence of our shift from known unknowns to unknown unknowns, right? Once our architecture, our infrastructure stops looking like that lamp stack on the left and starts looking more like that national electrical grid on the right, you're inviting so much chaos to live in your house that you just have to cede control. You just have to just keep your sanity, right? You just have to go, all right, it's yours. It's a simple function of complexity. But that means that you need real observability, right, to do it. And just like in chaos engineering is a form of testing and production. I've been saying for ages, if you don't have observability, all you have is chaos, not the engineering part, just the chaos. The reason that you need observability with these very specific, and I'm trying to be very specific because it's not about this vendor, that vendor, this tool. It's about, can it do the job? And if you can't break down by high cardinality dimensions, if you can't have high dimensionality, what you can't do at a low level is compare this test that I just did, this experiment that I just ran, this chaos that I just injected with the baseline, right? You have to be able to compare those exact rows with the baseline rows and see exactly what is different. And all of the things, are 50 different things different about these errors than the baseline? I need to know that. Is one thing different? I need to know that. These are the things that will get you that. It is life-changing. It is a great leap forward. It is what allows software engineers to speak to systems in the language that they understand, the language that they speak all day long, that the language of variables and function names and API endpoints. You can't expect software engineers to translate to low-level systems and this and that, all the stuff in /proc and everything. Well, software engineers can't, and they shouldn't have to. They shouldn't be able to interact with their code at the level of observability to be able to ask the simple questions. I just injected this test. What happened? Right? High cardinality is not a nice to have. You must be able to break down by like 1 in a million things and then break down. Yeah, right? Okay, so you get the picture. I've written more about this. I just want to emphasize, if you try to do this with a monitoring tool, you will be sad. You will not get the intended effects. So, because again, you'll just be firing off very sophisticated tests and then driving down the road with the blindfold on because you can't see what it's doing. All right, I made my point. Wrapping up. Testing in production, why I think you should care about this. This is just one side of the elephant. The industry-wide shift is like the center of gravity is swinging towards production for everyone. It's hard to get right. It is advanced. It is not as easy as running a LAMP stack was. Absolutely will not argue with you there. I will also not argue with you about, you can't just drop things on people. It has to be a process. You have to do it step by step. You have to have consent. You have to have buy-in. You have to have excitement. You have to have results. But if you can get here, it's so much better for everyone. Like the competitive advantage of being able to move this quickly, to not have to retrace ground over and over, going back and like fixing bugs and like, redoing work and like refactoring. So, it makes all the difference, and it's hard to explain until people have seen it. And so I'm just going to assume that I've made my point and move on. If you're on a team that is not high performing, as according to the DORA metrics, not according to me, I would be antsy if I was you. I would be trying to get out of there and find a place that could bring me up to a higher level, because that's how that shit works. Oh, sorry, I keep trying not to curse. Do you treat your deploys like the mission critical product that they are? This is another really important thing. Deploy code is production code, just like every feature that you write. Every manager should watch your metrics, be held accountable. Every software engineer should be on call. That's my personal belief. There are ways to accomplish ownership and responsibility without that necessarily. They're not as good. Or like the whole point here is to hook up really tight feedback loops that are not lossy, right? So the people who have the power and the context and the ability to change something are the people who get the alerts and they make the changes just like that, and everybody's happy, right? Not it takes months and gets baked into being the new normal. This is table stakes. Like if you don't like this, if you're a software engineer, just don't go work on a 24/7 available service. Easy, plenty of those. It's also a question of training, bringing everyone along, right? You don't just drop them in the deep end and go, so long, suckers, right? Everyone who has commit privileges should know what normal looks like. If you're only looking at your metrics and your telemetry when things are bad, you don't know what normal looks like. Everyone should know how to deploy, how to get to a known good state, how to do this in a controlled way so that you have fine-grained knobs around canaries. Should know how to debug in production, should know how to share this knowledge with their coworkers. If you must have staging environments, are you monitoring them? Why do people sink so much time into these environments when they can't even tell if it's broken or not? Here's your cheat sheet if you want to get better at this. This is how to have a high-performing team, an elite-performing team. These are all a good use of your time for almost every definition of the collective you. In conclusion, tonight we tested that. Thank you.